Good morning. Have any of you ever heard the term one-hit wonder? Raise your hand. Have you ever heard the term one-hit wonder? Think in your life, who are some one-hit wonders that you've enjoyed? One-hit wonder that I enjoyed was a guy named Thomas Dolby. D-O-L-B-Y. Anybody can remember Thomas? What was his one hit? She blinded me with science. Blinded me with science. I've been I love music, and a week or so ago, Sheldon, we had on my favorite radio station, WXPN's NPR affiliated University of Pennsylvania affiliated station, play great music throughout the year. And they started from A to Z for about 2 weeks. People got to call in, starting with the letter A all the way through Z, and they're the favorite songs, and by title. And we got to the S's, and somebody called in. She blinded me by science. And we think a lot about science with respect to EPA and environmental policy. This is Thomas Dolby calling now. And in concert it says, I'll be performing in Philadelphia. No, he doesn't say that. Anyway, we need to be guided by good science, sound science. And when it comes to saying how clean our air should be, how clean our water should be, what are the ways that we make sure that they're clean, let's rely on science. Let's rely on science. And I really want to thank everybody who's joined us today. I want to thank our speakers today. I want to thank Senator Markey, Senator Whitehouse for joining us. We're going to have some other colleagues will be in and out this morning. We were up pretty late last night. I turned in around 2:30. And so Senator Markey, you guys look pretty good. I went out and ran this morning. I felt every bit my 49 years. But we're glad that you're here. I'm glad that we're here and have an opportunity to, Colin, good morning, have an opportunity to be with all of you. But it's important that our nation's agency, EPA, is charged with protecting not only our environment, our health as well, but be guided by sound science. EPA has a long bipartisan tradition of using common sense and also scientific standards that protect the health and safety of the American people. I don't care whether you happen to be a newborn or you happen to be a really old person, all the way in and everybody in between. But building off the minimum from the very first Earth Day, I was there. I think I was 2 years old. Well, maybe a little bit older, but I was there on that first day in San Francisco. And EPA was created by not a Democratic president, but by a Republican president, as you recall, Richard Nixon, in 1970. And it's Richard Nixon. I'm the only person I know who quotes Richard Nixon. Only Democrat I know who quotes Richard Nixon. Now, Nixon used to say, the only people who don't do anything are the only people who don't make mistakes, rather. The only people who don't make mistakes are people who don't do anything. And those of us who are trying to do something good for our country, we all make mistakes. Creating the EPA was not one of his mistakes. It was one of the very good things that he did, and one of the good things that we've continued to nurture and to grow. Historically, the agency's common sense measures have been popular and bipartisan. In fact, when the Senate passed the first Clean Air Act in 1970, they did so without a single no vote, not one. And we all know that ensuring our children have clean water to drink and clean air to breathe is not a partisan issue. It's an American issue. That is why we should all want our nation's air quality, water quality, toxic standards to be based on the very best science available to protect our public's health. We need an EPA that listens to doctors, an EPA that listens to scientists, rather than just special interests when it comes to setting crucial health standards to clean our air, clean our water, and to protect us from toxic chemicals. An EPA that ignores sound science puts our children's health at risk, and indeed it puts all of our health at risk. We've made great progress since the EPA's creation in 1970. I went to Ohio State University. I'm a Buckeye, Navy ROTC midshipman there, and later a naval flight officer for many years. And I remember when the Cuyahoga River caught on fire. I remember when it caught on fire. And some of you may as well. We made great progress, but we still have tragic instances like the Crowd water crisis in Flint, Michigan. I'd like to say that's the only one. It's just the tip of the iceberg, unfortunately. But they remind us that more work needs to be done to protect all of our citizens. And for those who say we have to choose between having cleaner air and cleaner water and having a strong economy, I say that's a completely false choice. For the last 6 years, since our economic recovery began, we have cleaned our air further. cleaned our water, and we've seen 16 million jobs created. It's been the longest sustained economic recovery in the history of this country. And since the EPA's creation, our gross domestic product has grown by over 200%, and new economic opportunities, a lot of jobs have been created, and we need to do more. We've proven time and again that we can foster new economic opportunities in distressed communities without losing sight of critical public health and climate protection based on the best science available. And as we prepare for a new administration to take the reins in just about a week, we must all reaffirm in our commitments to an EPA guided by science. And with that then said, I want to introduce in order of the arrival, I want to ask Sheldon Whitehouse to come in and to talk with us. Sheldon is a great leader in our caucus, a great leader in the Senate on all things that relate to the environment. And Sheldon, thank you for your leadership, your strong voice, and for being guided by science. Thank you.
Thank you,
Sheldon
Tom.
Whitehouse.
I am super happy to be here with our new terrific ranking member on the Environment and Public Works Committee, and with the extraordinary and amazing Ed Markey, who was winning battles on climate change before I was even in the Senate. So we have a really good team here, and I suspect more to come. I also want to just take a moment and celebrate the exceptionally good news that Maura Healey, the Attorney General of Massachusetts, won in court yesterday against ExxonMobil. And ExxonMobil is going to have to produce the documents that she has sought. Since Ranking Member Carper opened with a popular culture reference, I will open with one too. I don't know if you've seen The Martian, but Matt Damon looks around at his stranded predicament and says to himself, I'm going to have to science the heck out of this. He didn't say heck, but this is a Senate proceeding, so I've dialed it down a little bit. The fossil fuel industry looked around at climate change and said, we're going to have to science denial the heck out of this. And they have gone about it. And the point that I want to make is that we talk about people who don't pay attention to the science. We talk about people who deny the science. That is actually an understatement of the case. They don't just ignore the science. They have busily gone about creating a false alternative science that they can put next to real science to create doubt about real science and delay action. It goes back to that famous purpose expressed in the tobacco memo: doubt is our product. And doubt, false doubt, is the product of the science denial scheme, the alternative or alt science scheme. If you look at real science has to go through tedious things like peer review. Alt science goes straight to Fox News. Real science has expertise in the subject matter at hand. Alt science has expertise in public relations. Real science is found in real universities. Alt science emerges from a bunch of phony front groups stood up by the fossil fuel industry with masquerade names to make them look like they're not fronts for the fossil fuel industry. And lastly, anybody who knows scientists, I'm married to one, we all know science struggles for money. In our universities, getting federal grants, getting support from states. Alt science has all the money it needs because the International Monetary Fund has calculated that fossil fuel gets an effective subsidy in the United States every year of $700 billion. How much alternative phony science do you think somebody protecting a $700 billion a year subsidy would be willing to spend to create that phony doubt? So they're rolling in money. They've got a whole stable of phony baloney scientists. I put that in quotes often. They go straight to Fox News and run by real scientists, and they know how to sell their product, which is doubt, rather than knowing what is actually going on in the substantive area of science. So we have a real battle on our hands, not just in the Environment and Public Works Committee, but also in every university in the land, whose scientists and whose science departments face a new and very powerful rival and adversary whose entire purpose, every time they go into the field, is to take the real science and cause people to doubt it. They are the antagonists of real science, and they are doing it deliberately. It is a disgrace, and we need to pay attention to it. Thank you very much, sir. Introduce Eddie. All right, I think I said everything nice I can already, but you know, he's from Massachusetts, where Maura Healey just had her big win. He's the Markey of Waxman Markey. He's been at this since I was in short pants chasing soccer balls around. He's our hero on climate, Ed Markey.
And Sheldon, here's where Sheldon and I are going to be joined at the hip. And we're so glad that Tom Carper, well, my wife is a scientist too, but she's a doctor. So we're going to join at the hip and work to make sure that Tom gives us the leadership, gives the country the leadership, because we want EPW to stand for Environmental Policies Work. That's our goal. And we are going to make sure that the Bay State and the Ocean State, which are the chemistry experiments that are going on out in the oceans off of our coastline, are in fact reflected in the policies that are adopted during this era that we're about to enter. And Sheldon, when you Google oceans, Sheldon's picture comes up. He is the expert on this incredible experiment that is going on, not just in the United States, but across the planet. So we know that Scott Pruitt wants EPA to stand for every polluter's ally. We're going to make sure that that is not the case. He questions the science of climate change. He has accused EPA of overestimating air pollution from drilling of natural gas wells in Oklahoma. He has sued to block the EPA from restricting mercury, a toxin that causes brain damage in kids. He has argued against President Obama's Clean Power Plan, which the EPA is supposed to implement. So Sheldon and I, there's an old saying that when two people agree upon absolutely everything, you don't need one of those people. But then we're talking about the United States Senate. So we're going to need this team that is put together in order to fight and fight hard. And that's what I'm committed to doing and working with Tom and Sheldon to accomplish that goal. So thank you so much for all of your leadership. Yes.
Eddie, thanks. My thanks to you and to Sheldon. I get to start off, and we're going to introduce the first of five folks who are going to speak briefly. Colin O'Mara, who is president and CEO of the National Wildlife Federation. I first heard the name Colin O'Mara when he was 29 years old, and the governor of Delaware, Jack Markell, announced that he was hiring some guy from California named Colin O'Mara to come to Delaware to be the secretary of the Department of Natural Resources and Environmental Control. I said to myself, 29 years old? Isn't that a little young? And then somebody reminded me that I was elected state treasurer when I was 29, and Joe Biden was elected to the U.S. Senate when he was 29 years old. So I guess Colin wasn't too young, and he did that job, did it remarkably well until a few years ago when he went over to run and be the CEO of the National Wildlife Federation. I want to thank him for being here, and Tricia and Kay from the Moms Clean Air Force. I want to thank Sister Simone Campbell for being here, and Dr. Samantha Doot. And finally, David McCabe, and each speaker who comes will introduce the speaker to follow them. Nice round of applause for our friend Colin O'Mara. Colin.
When President Kennedy, famously talked about us all breathing the same air, he was talking about humanity. He was talking about there's these common truths that regardless of where you are on the planet, that you must adhere to. And for the next 45, 50 years after that address, there was more of a focus on making sure that in the US, we were actually living up to the promise of clean air and clean water. And over the next, in the 70s in particular, there was amazing bipartisan support for making sure that we had strong environmental laws on the books. And the one thing that's common in every single one of them is that they're all predicated on a sound foundation of sound science. Every single one of them. And the National Wildlife Federation, we're the nation's largest wildlife conservation organization. We got hunters and anglers and birders and gardeners. We got Republicans and Democrats. We got conservatives and liberals. We all depend on healthy natural resources. If you look at the work of the Environmental Protection Agency, when there's a crisis, when scientists basically have that clarion call that there's an emergency that must be addressed, it's the EPA that helps find those solutions to take that sound science and make sure there's practical solutions on the ground. When we were dealing with acid rain, that was screwing up, for those of us like to fly fish, and it was screwing up our waterways, and it was the EPA that came up with cost-effective solutions, and as Senator Carper often says, they came up with solutions that it basically solved the problem in half the time at a quarter of the cost that was originally estimated. And we've seen this over and over again. When our bald eagles were declining, we saw a scientist pinpoint a solution that was able to address it and bring back our majestic national bird. And if you hunt, if you fish, you know that the deer that you eat and the fish that you catch are often healthier because of the work that's been done. And so this is not a partisan issue until recently. I mean, the challenge, and I think Senator Whitehouse said it perfectly, the assault on science is a fairly new phenomenon. There have been deniers in other spaces, but for the most part, the scientists that have been protecting our natural resources and pinpointing those challenges have been listened to. And there's nowhere this is more important, frankly, than climate science. So a fundamental question that must be answered by anyone considering leading that organization or actually working at EPA is a support for sound science. And there are amazing scientists around the globe that are nearly unanimous in their research, in their recommendations to us that we need to act. We need to act on climate, we need to act on water quality, we need to act on improving air quality. We still have tens of millions of folks in this country that are not breathing clean air. We have tens of millions of Americans that are not drinking clean water. We have lots of fish, and whether you fish for bass or fish for trout. There's no Republican, big mouth, smallmouth bass. There's no Democratic, rainbow trout. But they're suffering some pretty bad waterways right now because we have more work to do. All of this starts with science, because if you don't have some foundational science, then you can't have the next level of conversation about practical solutions. And the challenge is when you're fighting over that first fundamental building block, you're losing time. And right now, we can't afford to be losing time. So I would argue that you cannot be pro-sportsman, you cannot be pro-outdoors if you're not pro-science. You cannot believe in our outdoor heritage and not want a better future for your kids if you're not pro-science. And the only way that we're going to make sure that we do have a future that is cleaner and greener and brighter is that if we have sound science driving the direction. I'm very proud to stand with these two men that have been leading on the scientific front for a long time. This, as I said at the beginning, this is not a partisan issue. Presidents like Reagan and Nixon and the first Bush administration predicated huge parts of their agenda on sound science. We can get there again, but it's going to start with saying, facts are facts. And one of my personal heroes was a colleague of these men, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan. He said, everyone's entitled to their own opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. And we need to start with sound science. Thank you very much for having me today. So as a parent of a young daughter, there are organizations that I just really adore across the country, and one of them is the Moms Clean Air Force. And as someone who grew up in a Catholic family, you listen to your mom, you listen to the sisters, you listen to the strong women in your life, and that's why I think I was raised right. We have two incredibly passionate advocates today, and that's Tricia Sheehan and Kay Mills from the Moms Clean Air Force.
Thank you, Colin, and thank you, Senator Whitehouse, Senator Markey, and Senator Carper for inviting us to be here this afternoon. As Colin said, my name is Tricia Sheehan. I'm the mom to two young boys, with my third boy on the way, and we live in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm also a member of Moms Clean Air Force. We're a community of over 950,000 moms from across the country, united to protect our children's health from toxic chemicals and toxic air pollution. As moms, we ask that any EPA chief should put the health of American families and the safety of our communities first. We ask that the EPA chief be guided by science, as our sign says, and we ask that the EPA chief honor the great American tradition of protecting our right to breathe clean air and drink healthy water, clean water. Scott Pruitt fails on all three of these basic qualifications. So as mothers, we call on the Senate to reject his confirmation to head the Environmental Protection Agency. Okay.
Good morning. My name is Kay Mills. I'm from Missouri, and I'm a mother of 3. And like Trisha, I have another on the way. As a pregnant mother, I'm extremely concerned about Scott Pruitt's rejection of the long-respected science on the impact of mercury pollution on pregnant women, unborn babies, and small children. Scott Pruitt has repeatedly sued to block common-sense protections from mercury pollution. This should be a cause for concern for any senator who cares about the health of children, pregnant women, and our growing babies. Americans don't want more pollution in our air and water. We deserve an EPA administrator who respects and honors the great American tradition of protecting our children's health and the safety of our communities. Thank you for letting us speak today. And I'd like to turn it over to Sister Simone Campbell, Executive Director of the Network Lobby for Catholic Social Justice and leader of Nuns on the Bus.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you to you senators for, well, almost senator. I lost Senator Markey for his leadership in making what is common sense once again at the center of the conversation, because science is often common sense. Pope Francis, in paragraph 49 of his encyclical on the environment, said, "Today we have to realize that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor." That is what we're about today. The issues that our nation faces with the environment are critical for our very survival. And it is the role of the Environmental Protection Agency to listen to the cries of the earth and the cries of the poor and respond to them with the best science available. This is not polarized politics. This is actual fact. And in our political world right now here on Capitol Hill, facts seem to be missing in action. But at the EPA, it's got to be the center of their concern. On our bus trip in 2015, I met 2 moms who had just started Just Moms in St. Louis. I wonder, Kay, if you know them. And they are low-wage working moms who found affordable apartments near the Westlake landfill and a Superfund cleanup site. They met in an oncologist office where their children, Trevor, let me show you a picture of Trevor at various stages of his illness, and Christy, who actually died of her cancer, had rare brain cancers that appeared to be related to the toxicity at the Superfund site. They gathered strong evidence that evidence not only were their kids affected, but over 300 kids in a 5-mile radius were affected with these rare cancers. They attempt to share that reality and the discovery that these radioactive wastes are left over from the building of the first atomic bomb. Now, I'm getting old, but that is even longer before I was born, and that this toxicity continues unabated because of money questions. The EPA has attempted to move this forward. We have science, we have engagement, we have concern. We now need action, and this is not the time to step back from that action. It is the role of the EPA to supervise the cleanup of these Superfund sites. The EPA is tasked both with direct engagement and governmental regulation that responds to the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. Trevor and Christy and other children around the toxic sites in our nation need a strong EPA to help wipe away their tears. Our nation needs a strong EPA to reduce the weeping of the earth. This is our patriotic responsibility, and for me, it's also part of my faith. We need the EPA engaged with science and moving to action. This is what we seek. Thank you.
Amen.
Oh, yes, correct. And now I'm really honored to introduce Dr. Samantha Udhut, who's the assistant professor of pediatrics at the Virginia Commonwealth School of Medicine. Perfect segue for my story.
Well, thank you. It's really an honor to be here with our senators, and I'm so grateful. We're so grateful for all of your work. And I'm a pediatrician. I practice in Alexandria, Virginia. I was on call last weekend, and I had 2 children admitted to the hospital for respiratory distress. The first was an 8-year-old boy who's had very difficult to control asthma. He's been admitted almost every year of his life. And the other was a 12-year-old boy who had no asthma history, who for the past month had progressive cough. He'd been to the ER 3 times and eventually ended up needing to be admitted for oxygen and frequent treatments and steroids. And pediatricians like myself are good at taking care of children when they're sick. But the goal of every doctor and every parent is to prevent our children from getting sick, is to keep them at home with their families, at school, learning, in sports, getting exercise. And this is really where the EPA comes in. The EPA is what doctors like I cannot, and that is reduce pollutants in the atmosphere which make our children and our parents and our grandparents sick. And I consider EPA really a public health agency. Clean air standards reduce bronchitis, they reduce asthma attacks, and they improve children's lung development. Over the past 20 years, EPA's clean air standards have been extremely successful. The Clean Air Act works, and it's making our children healthier. And we know this quite well now from 20 years of data of children in Southern California and how their lung development and their lung symptoms have improved. 2 large studies were published in the past year in 2 of our leading medical journals, New England Journal of Medicine and JAMA. And this looked at thousands of children in Southern California between 1993 and 2012. And as you know, Southern California used to be plagued by air pollution, but because of EPA's clean air standards, we've had major reductions in nitrogen dioxide, particulate matter, and ozone. And these studies found that children between 1993 and 2012 had significant reductions in their bronchitis prevalence, particularly in asthmatic children. Their lungs grew better. Children who were 11 to 15 between 2008 and 2012 actually had more lung growth than the children who were 11 to 15 between 1994 and 1998. And that means that the 15-year-olds in 2012 were going into adulthood with more lung volume, with stronger lungs, and that's going to keep them healthier into their adulthood, protect them from premature death and from chronic lung disease. So the bottom line is EPA knew good science, and it knew that these toxins were harmful to children's lungs, and they were correct. They used the Clean Air Act to reduce these pollutants, and our children are healthier as a result. And today we really need the EPA more than ever because probably the most complex and serious pollutant is carbon dioxide, which is changing our infectious disease patterns, making allergy symptoms more severe, allergy season longer, and worsening severe heat events. So physicians like myself really rely on the EPA to protect our children, and we strongly support the EPA's work to protect the public health. Thank you very much. Absolutely, yeah. So I'm very happy to introduce David McCabe from the Clean Air Task Force.
David, welcome. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is David McCabe. I'm an atmospheric chemist, and I serve as a senior scientist with the Clean Air Task Force, an environmental organization focused on clean air and climate protection. We work to understand the sources of air pollution and how they can be reduced. We produce rigorous science that is published in peer-reviewed journals and in reports designed for the use of policymakers. I want to thank Senator Carper, Senator Whitehouse, for inviting me to speak here today, and thank you for your years of leadership on clean air and climate issues. I'm here today to speak, like my predecessors, on behalf of integrity in environmental science, a case I think most of us thought we would never really have to make. As Colin mentioned, it used to be that everyone was entitled to their own opinions but not their own facts, but things have changed. Indeed, earlier this week, President Obama got some of his loudest cheers during his farewell address in Chicago, simply by saying, quote, "Science and reason matter." Government in general, and US EPA in particular, must be guided by rigorous peer-reviewed science. No one imagines that an airline would ever dispatch a plane without proper instrumentation or accurate weather information. In the same way, public health and environmental safeguards must be guided by the best science. Why? Simply because if we get it wrong, people die, children are poisoned, natural resources are destroyed, and the money we do spend to safeguard them may be squandered. EPA relies on health science when it monitors air pollution levels and issues smog alerts, warning people to limit outdoor activities to protect their health. It uses science to oversee rigorous monitoring of toxic mercury that can harm children's brains, and to calculate the risk of damages from climate change. We can't just wave these issues away by saying, I'm not a scientist, and ignoring known risks. If we do, we risk missing everything from human impacts on our climate to the damage to children's brains caused by lead in pipes. Although elevating willful scientific ignorance to the level of public discourse is kind of a new thing, as Senator Whitehouse mentioned, it's really not the greatest threat to scientific integrity that we face right now. As he described, polluting industries are funding millions of dollars of so-called research to debunk good environmental science, simply because it's much cheaper to do that than it is to change their practices. Research carried out and funded by the government is needed to provide an impartial counterbalance to this fake science. And there is no other institution in our society besides the government with sufficient resources to compete with self-serving industry-funded science. We know that tobacco industry-funded research paralyzed government from taking action to reduce tobacco use for decades. As a result, millions of lives were unnecessarily lost. But that's just the most infamous example. If we had relied only on industry-funded science, we would also have concluded that ozone smog that we breathe is actually a good sunscreen. We would have concluded that power plant particulate pollution is harmless. We would have thought that mercury contamination does not damage children's developing brains. We would have concluded that dioxin is safe and that climate change is a hoax. The election did not repeal any scientific laws. We can choose to ignore what objective data are telling us about the damage to the environment. But nature will keep a comprehensive tab, and whether we choose to acknowledge it or not, the bill will have to be paid. Thank you. I would now like to turn the microphone back to Senator Carper.
Thank you. Nice round of applause. Thank you. Thanks to each of our speakers, certainly Sheldon and Senator Markey. One of the things that David said at the end, just reminded, my last year as governor, I was governor from 93 to 2001. Last year as governor, we won, and this is part of the work of the AGs, some of the AGs around the country who sued the tobacco industry on behalf of 50 states, because we were forced to pay much greater costs in Medicaid than would otherwise be the case because people used tobacco products. And we won a huge settlement, and out of that settlement, $1 billion went to create something called the American Legacy Foundation, the American Legacy Foundation. And I was the founding vice chairman of the American Legacy Foundation, along with Christine Gregoire, who went on to become governor of Washington State. The focus of our work on the American Legacy Foundation was something called the Truth Campaign. The Truth Campaign. And both Sheldon and David have mentioned how there's some in this country who seek to create doubt around what is causing the illness and sickness of our people. And we sought in the Truth Campaign to make sure that the people in this country, especially young people in this country, who were thinking of smoking, that if they were thinking about it, make sure they didn't start. If they are already starting to smoke or ingest tobacco products, to make sure they stopped. It was one of the most successful public health campaigns in the history of the country. And it's still bearing fruit today. But it was because we sought the truth, we found the truth, we made sure that people in this country knew the truth. Every night before I go to bed, we all probably pray at some time in our day, Lord, help me get through this day, or thank you for this beautiful day to run today, or whatever might be the occasion. I pray every night before I go to bed, before I go to sleep. I pray for wisdom. I pray for wisdom. I pray for wisdom for myself, for all of my colleagues, Democrat, Republican, even a couple of those independents. in the Senate and in the House. I pray for wisdom for the President, the Vice President, their families, so that we'll know what is the right thing to do, and we'll have the courage and strength to do that which is right. And that's what we're going to endeavor to do in this year, in this administration, as long as we're on watch. And I want to stop there and just open it up for any questions that folks may have of Sheldon and myself or some of our speakers. And just feel free to raise your hand and tell us who you are and your affiliation, and we'll just recognize you. Please go ahead, please.
Jeremy Dunn with CQ.
Next question here. No, go ahead, Jeremy.
Maybe a Trump
Fake news. This is fake news.
with the confirmation hearing next week, can you frame this message in how that will affect next week's proceedings and how you'll approach Scott Pruitt's
Yeah.
confirmation?
Actually, has what we're talking about here today has a lot to do with helping us as a body decide who's going to lead the Environmental Protection Agency. I think there's certainly broad agreement here, and I think around the country, that our environmental policies should be guided by sound science. And to have the head of an agency whose job it is really to protect us and help the states protect our public health, to be guided, to be led by someone who does not believe in sound science, does not trust sound science, does not access or has not taken advantage of access to sound science, we have to think twice about whether that's the kind of person who should be leading this agency. I have sent to our nominee over 50 questions to ask of him a variety of information on a variety of things. Where do you get your science? Are you guided? Do you think the Environmental Protection Agency should be guided by science? And that's a critical question for him to answer, not just to me, but to us, and I think to the American people. Next, please. Yes, ma'am. Just introduce yourself, please.
Given the lower threshold for confirmation here, what is your goal in the hearing next week? What are you hoping to achieve in that, and how important do you see the final vote count for you?
Yeah, we want to get to the truth. We want to get to the truth. One of the questions we'll be asking, I'll ask it just rhetorically now. Well, why do we have an EPA in the first place? Do we still have? Do the reasons that we created the EPA in the first place do they still resonate today? How we made the remarkable progress over the last, 40, 45 years. What do we need to do to continue to make that kind of progress? And I need to be convinced, I suspect my colleagues do as well, to be convinced that this nominee is someone who's prepared to lead us into further improvement in our quality of our air, quality of our water, and the health of our people. And that's what we hope to accomplish. We want to be fair, and we want to be open, but we want to get to the truth. Yes, please. Introduce yourself, please.
Jack Fitzpatrick, Morning Consult. It seems like Pruitt has a pretty well-established record on a lot of the issues he faced running the EPA. Are there many policy areas where you don't know what his stance on it? Or are your questions mostly going to be sort of process-oriented, like how did you get the science behind whichever issue, climate change or otherwise?
Yeah, I'll give you an example. Some of our colleagues who come from states where they are very much affected by the renewable fuel standard and creating, growing the plants that will fuel us and feed us. And the question apparently in one of the meetings that the nominees had with the folks from those states is indicated that he would be guided by the laws. He's not going to make up the laws that are ever passed by the Congress. Those are the laws that he'll certainly enforce as the head of EPA. Well, as it turns out, the Renewable Fuel Standard Law gives the administrative EPA, as some of you know, a huge amount of discretion. A huge amount of discretion in this regard. And it somehow suggests that the nominee is going to be guided by the law. Well, that law says you're going to have a lot of discretion. So the question is, I think Sheldon, what are you going to do with that? What are you going to do with that? All the way in back, please. And you can ask Sheldon. Just come on in here, Sheldon. We're going to ask tough questions, I think fair questions. We're going to take a fair amount of time to get there. We've asked already probing questions and I think serious, appropriate questions of the nominee. We're waiting till we get those answers. We're going to pour through those answers. We'll have those answers by the date of our hearing. And then subsequent to that, there will be additional questions. We call them questions for the record. And we will be guided. It's like we want the head of EPA to be guided by science. We want to be guided by the truth and real insights. And where we take those depends on what we learn. But at the end of the day, we don't want to go back. We want to go back. We want to go forward as a country. John, you want to add to that?
The only point I'd add to what the ranking member has said is that behind the substantive controversy over whether Attorney General Pruitt will come in as EPA administrator and simply take the side of his longstanding fossil fuel patrons in all areas of discretion versus doing an honorable and science-based job is a process question. And that is that a lot of these controversial nominees have been rammed, jammed, and stacked through the Senate in unprecedented ways. So I do think it is important for us as an institution to slow down that process to make sure that FBI background checks, financial disclosure requirements, and the ethics agreements between incoming nominees and their agencies have all been worked through, and we have the chance to ask questions about that. That's kind of baseline stuff. As you know from the letter that Minority Leader Schumer sent to Majority Leader McConnell, in which he simply crossed out the name of Harry Reid at the top and the name of Mitch McConnell at the bottom and sent Mitch his own letter back. So there's a real novelty taking place. We have a combination of quite a considerable number of quite extreme nominees, a very slow vetting process by the administration to get them ready for all of this, forms and reporting requirements, basic transparency for the committee that has not been achieved, and yet this desire to roll everybody through as fast as possible, often trying to stack the hearings so that the press gets muted and confused and complicated. So entirely apart from the question of the merits or demerits of Attorney General Pruitt for this position is the question of, is the Senate going to take a long step back from the policies that have been a bipartisan and consistent tradition in it that inform our advice and consent function? And that's very much part of this as well.
Right here, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, for Senator Whitehouse.
Go ahead and introduce yourself,
Sorry,
please.
Carolyn Lockhead, San Francisco Chronicle. To follow up on that, what do you expect from a Pruitt administrator? I mean, can you sort of describe what you think is at stake here, what he might do once in office?
Based on his record, just drawing very reasonable deductions from what he's done already, I think the most reasonable conclusion to be drawn is that in every area in which he has the ability to exercise discretion, including the hidden discretion of delay and disinterest, he will lean in as far as he possibly can to protect the fossil fuel industry that has for so long been his patron, to the point where he has actually been caught taking letters from the fossil fuel industry and putting his own official letterhead on them, and with virtually nil in the way of editing, turned them in as the work of the Attorney General of the people of Oklahoma. So I think there's lots of concern. Saul had an epiphany on the road to Damascus. Is it possible that Mr. Pruitt will have an epiphany in this role?
Saul was not blinded by science.
All things are possible, but I think we have to deal with what the reasonable conclusions are that his record suggests, unless we find something to the contrary. And he'll have a very robust hearing to make that case for himself, why something other than the trajectory of his past conduct should be imputed to him as a possible EPA administrator.
One more and we're done. somebody who hasn't had a chance to, right back here, yes, please, all the way in back. Your name and where you,
My name's Lois Bjornson, and I'm from southwestern Pennsylvania, and we're heavily fracked. We're surrounded by dirty wells and so on and so forth, and pipelines. And I hear what you're saying, and I really, really appreciate it. But if he is confirmed, basically, what can we do as people and citizens that live in these areas? How much pressure can we continue to keep putting on to perhaps have someone else appointed or something of that sort? And I'm not very well versed in the political process, so forgive me, but we're trying to look at this from protecting our family and our children, and we need to know what else we can do to help you.
one of the things that, one of the committees I serve on is called Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs. Homeland Security, that's pretty self-evident what that is. Governmental Affairs includes oversight over the whole federal government. And there's a subcommittee on Homeland Security, Governmental Affairs, permanent subcommittee on investigation. I'll be the senior Democrat on that subcommittee. And we'll do investigation, a whole lot of different kinds of investigations, including to try to make sure whoever is at the helm of EPA is actually abiding by the oath that he or she takes. And one of the things that citizens need to do is to hold people like Sheldon and myself and our Republican counterparts need to hold us accountable and responsible to make sure that we're doing our job. And if we are, then that better ensures that whoever takes the oath and to lead this agency or other agencies will do their jobs. That's certainly one of those. Y'all are good to come today. I want to again thank each of our witnesses. Christoph Dulu, raise your hand over there. Christoph was the previous Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources. He's one of the predecessors of Colin here, and I've been blessed to have the wisdom and counsel from both of them and from many of you. We're grateful for your help and for your support. Your nation, our nation, is grateful as well. Take care. God bless you all. Thanks so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. I need your card. Good to see you again. How are you?